friends, I want to ask you to consider. You're helping me. You know, you're listening to me, and you need to start making some advancements towards helping me. Many of you have invested a year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years of your life listening to me. And some of you used to be probably members of the church, and so you find yourself in an awkward position. I want to come back to why and how I think you should try to help me. But first, I want to speak about a very dear friend of mine who is deceased in the person of the Reverend Dr. Edward Earl Johnson, who was a friend of mine. He was the pastor of the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, and he was the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference at one point in time, president of the United Missionary Baptist Association, of which I was a member of. The United Missionary Baptist Association ordained me, while Dr. Johnson was the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference of New York City and greater vicinity. I was the secretary of that conference, and we were friends. Dr. Johnson, he fell on hard times. A number of things began to go sour in his life. And his bank called the mortgage in, and they didn't have the money to pay the mortgage. And it was one of the first churches that was actually foreclosed by a bank, as best I can interpret it. And he passed away back in 2011. He's been gone from us now 10 years, but very young man. I think he was younger than I was, quite frankly, or about the same age. And but the bank foreclosed. I believe that's what happened. He lost the church, and whether he sold it to a developer, I'm not sure of all the details, and I'll stand corrected. But my point is this: I remember when Dr. Johnson was going through this very stressful and strenuous foreclosure procedure on the Mount Moriah Baptist Church, a stayed Baptist church on Fifth Avenue and 126th Street. And my concern here is this, is that the United Missionary Baptist Association, the Baptist Ministers Conference of USA, and the Baptist Ministers Conference of Greater New York and vicinity, and there were 400 pastors that were members of the Baptist Ministers Conference from Connecticut to New Jersey, and Brooklyn, Queens, Staten Island. And the fact that he went through the stress, and I'll be corrected, I'm assuming that the bank took his church because he didn't have the money and his members he didn't have the unity of his members to stand with him. And they took his church. The bank foreclosed and put the church in the street. That's what I think. Now, I could be wrong. I don't have the details, and I'll be glad to correct myself. But I tell you what, it was so stressful. He died. It was just so stressful upon him. And they did put him out. They did put the congregation out of the building. I'm going to finish with this, and I'll let you go. With 400 preachers who were pastors themselves, most of them were churches, the fact that they let that pastor suffer that way and didn't pay that mortgage off themselves it's horrific. It's unconscionable. That's the word I better want to use. That those 400, he was the president of the Baptist Ministers Conference, and that those 400 people, pastors, churches, didn't pitch in, pay that mortgage off, and let that man and his congregation stay in that church. It's just unconscionable. It represents everything but brotherly love. There's a verse written in the Psalms, I think it's Psalms 133 or 131, I'll check it out, that says, "Oh, how good and pleasant it is when brethren dwell together in unity." But that 400 pastors with churches in the greater New York vicinity area did not come to that man's aid, rescue him, and pay that mortgage and let that church live is just unthinkable. But that's what happened. That's what I believe happened. Now, I was out of the loop by then. I was no longer focusing with that group. I was, I'd kind of moved on myself. But I want to revisit this on behalf of my friend, Dr. Johnson. I believe he'd be alive today had they come to his aid. And why is it that many churches, we're talking about Hamite churches, will let that happen to Dr. Johnson? He was a very young man. One could say, well, he should have been a better manager of money. He should have been a better leader. You can do all those woulda, coulda, shoulda things, and maybe some of them are true. But the ultimate goal, I wrote a check for $500 myself, even though I was out of the loop. I left the Baptist Ministers Conference in the late 80s, I think, and this is 20 years after I left them. I left the United Missionary Baptist Association. I moved on to do some other kinds of things with the ministry that God gave to me. I still have an affinity, and I appreciate all of the people of the Baptist Ministers Conference that were there during my day. I appreciate and have a love for that experience that I had. But Dr. Johnson was truly. I mean, he just, he was a friend. I preached at his church, but the fact that 400 pastors didn't say, we're not going to let this man lose his church. Now, let me clear something up. We've gone through foreclosure proceedings. I've been fighting foreclosure for how long? For, 5 years, 6 years now. The issue is not money. The issue is with us is that we got too much money. By that, our church has a fairly stacked number of its worth in terms of its marketable value in the millions. And the lawyers have played me. They have purposely not closed the case because as long as I'm paying them and I'm just a regular client, they understand they could stop they could stop the foreclosure if they want. But once they do that, I don't have to pay them anymore. So that has been a problem. So I've had bad lawyers. It isn't where I don't have the same experience. I think Dr. Johnson had. So I'm not here ringing a bell for myself. But I do want to say that pastors selling their churches being foreclosed, business being bulldozed over, churches being bulldozed over here in Harlem, is very painful to watch. It is very painful. And I don't know what Dr. Johnson's children and grandchildren are today. I don't know where they are or how they're making it. But I would like to reach out to them and, give them a gift in honor of what their father did. And when he was my friend, he was my friend. And I'm perturbed at the fact that these 400 pastors didn't get together and save Mount Moriah. Having said that, let me talk to many of you out there who listen to me every day, but you've never lifted a hand to help me. You know it takes money to do what you do, and what I do is a whole lot more than what you do. And it doesn't stand to reason that you could be helped. So listen to me as much as you must find it profitable. I don't think you come and listen to me every day because you don't like me or that you hate me or that you're not benefiting. I don't think that about you. God forbid that's something as bizarre that all these people listen to me, but they all hate me. And none of them are benefiting. They're just here just to occupy time. They got nothing with their life to do but listen to me say boom shakalaka. But yet, like those 400 pastors who let that man suffer, you've never lifted your hand to help. You've never you've never given an offering. And many of you don't belong to any ministries. You could join this ministry, submit yourself as a member. Thank you, Mr. Engineer. And you could be a part of the process going forward, sharing with the other. And all of this that comes to you, somebody else is paying for it. all this fancy broadcast equipment that we use. You know, somebody else is paying for you to get it. And what is it with human nature that you're willing to take so much, but you're not willing to give? That's one aspect. And then I'm going to let you go. I promise not to bother you any further. But, you know, giving to this ministry is a good thing. I believe that you really are benefiting. And if it's a good thing, why stifle it by refusing to support it? It's like going into a restaurant that you like. You love the food. Go in the Waffle House and get up and walk away and say, well, let somebody else pay my bill. Let the next person down the aisle pay for me. I'll be back tomorrow to eat again, but I don't plan to pay. Let somebody else pay. What troubles me about that is that what kind of person, what are people turning out to be today? I mean, some of you are daily, every day, yet never making any attempt to help pay these expensive bills that we have to pay to get this broadcast to you. Would you pray about that? And I'm going to pray about Dr. Johnson and those 400 pastors that let that man suffer like that. I'm James Everett Manning, everybody. I am the Lord's servant.